You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 19th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, what is Israel doing in Syria?
We will determine the best arrangement that will ensure our security.
In a visit to Syrian territory seized by Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his troops will stay. Also coming up, we revisit the US city of Asheville as it battles to recover from Hurricane Helene. Plus,
I think doing this book has really taught me so much about the country that I did not expect. And certainly as an Italian, as you will know, we obviously have our own kind of competition when it comes to, who's the best when it comes to summer holidays.
We'll have more on Monocle's celebration of Greece. We'll go through the papers, ask why Poland's right-wing politicians might regret a Donald Trump presidency, and find out about Portugal's competition to find the next passport design. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will announce additional funding for humanitarian assistance to Sudan later today. The German government has doubled the amount of arms exports to Ukraine this year and halved them to Israel. And Boeing has resumed production of all of its aircraft. A strike by machinists had halted production of its 737, 767 and 777 models across the Pacific Northwest. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, just what is Israel's intention in Syria? In a move that's expected to anger the Syrian rebels now taking charge, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited territory Israel recently took control of in Syria and vowed that Israeli troops would remain in the country for the foreseeable future. It is a destabilising move for the new leaders of Syria, who've also been warned that they need to respect the rights of the country's diverse religious and ethnic groups. Well, from Istanbul now, I'm joined by Sophia Yan, who's a senior foreign correspondent for The Telegraph and who's been in Syria in the last couple of weeks. A very good morning to you, Sophia. Welcome back to Monocle Radio.
Good morning, Emma.
So just explain to us, what exactly do we think that Israel is doing on the Syrian-Israeli border?
Israeli forces have moved in. They moved in on Syria almost immediately after Assad collapsed. And what they've done more recently that has drawn criticism is that they've seized territory in southern Syria. And this is an area of land that goes beyond the border of the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights itself, a strategic plateau that Israel seized decades ago. And it sits in the middle of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. So the Golan Heights, again, already contested, and Israel moving beyond that area into what has long been a UN-patrolled buffer zone. Now, they're in this area of about 155 square miles at this point, and Israel, as you mentioned earlier, has made very clear its plans for an extended occupation of this buffer zone. Netanyahu saying this atop a mountain in the Golan, a very strategic move. It was a big show of what Israel is planning going forward, which is that it will stay in this occupation, this extended occupation of the buffer zone.
Have they given
from Israel's perspective?
Have they given a reason why they're doing this?
Well, from Israel's perspective, this is a high vantage point that it says could help identify neighboring threats. The idea is that Israel wants to ensure its security. This is exactly what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was saying. There is a lot of worry. You have to consider this in the backdrop of the war in Gaza. Now, Israel has been working to shore up its buffer zones. They've been extending these, widening these out because of this concern of border security. So in some ways, Israel is still thinking about this in the lens of the attacks that it suffered from Hamas on October 7th in 2023. That was quite some time ago, but that war is still ongoing, the Israel-Palestine conflict. There is this sense that Israel must ensure some greater border security because it still does perceive neighboring threats.
The new authorities in charge or trying to take control of what's happening in Syria are struggling, therefore, to gain territorial control already. I mean, they've barely been in Damascus for a week and suddenly find themselves embroiled in a major international row, don't they? I mean, they have the leader of the HTS group, Ahmed al-Sharaa, said that Israel's new military presence violates a 1974 armistice agreement between the two countries. This is not getting things off to a good start, is it?
This is definitely complicating things for the new Syrian government, which is still, as you mentioned, very young, very much in transition. This is something that they will have to contend with. Al-Sharaa, the leader who led the Syrian insurgency to victory, he's made very clear that Syria does not want any conflict with Israel. And he's made very clearly the point that what Israel has long said, that it must operate strikes into Syrian territory. For all these years, Israel said that it needed to do so in order to neutralize a threat coming from Iran. Iran, again, using Syria for its own purposes, for instance, using it as a land bridge to arm militant groups that it supported, like Hezbollah in Lebanon. Well, Iran clearly weakened at this point in terms of its influence in Syria, no longer operating in the same capacity. And that, from the new Syrian government's perspective, means that what Israel has said, the reason that it has always given for why it needs to operate in Syrian territory, that reason's gone. And so now this is something that these two countries are going to have to deal with going forward, perhaps with the support of the international community. This is something that, again, from what Israel's done, has been very heavily criticized because there is a sense that Israel is being very opportunistic, moving in at a time when there's chaos in Syria to further its own aims.
And you mentioned that the international community, the UN has told Israel that it needs to withdraw its troops. Conversely, the defence minister has ordered the troops to prepare to stay in situ for at least the duration of the winter. It does, again, once again call into question what the UN or indeed international bodies can do about this.
This is the approach that Israel has had for quite some time. And again, this buffer zone, this has become its border security strategy more recently, because it is still reeling from those Hamas attacks. It is still reeling from the sense of broken security, really. And so this is just one of many, many pretty large, pretty important challenges that the new Syrian government will need to contend with. War really is not over. We see that with what Israel has done. We also see that in the eastern part of the country. There are still clashes that had occurred between Turkish-backed armed forces and Kurdish fighters. There is a temporary ceasefire, but this itself is another part of the country that's still in flux. And again, this new government, so young, so new, and so many challenges already on its plate.
Let's talk about these internal challenges. I mean, we've heard in the last 12 hours that the de facto leader of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has said his country is exhausted. It has no desire to become a threat to its neighbours or to the West. But what it does have to do is solve incredibly complicated problems internally.
Yes, absolutely. This eastern Syria issue is one that the new government also needs to really consider. So just to back up a little bit, there have been clashes ongoing for years between a group, the Syrian National Army, supported by Turkey, and Kurdish fighters, a group called the Syrian Democratic Forces, the primary component of which is a group, please bear with me here on the acronyms. This one is the YPG. And this is a group that, from the Turkish perspective, is a terrorist organization. And so clashes have been ongoing. Again, even though now there's been a ceasefire for a period of time, it's now been extended and talks ongoing about what to do next. Still, to Turkey, this Kurdish threat remains the number one priority, one that must be neutralized. And this has remained an issue for Ankara after the fall of Assad. The overarching concern here is that, and this remains absolutely unresolved, is that the SDF, which is backed by the U.S., and again, this is the umbrella over which the group that Turkey considers to be a terrorist organization, they have as a whole been very instrumental in countering ISIS. The SDF still continues to help with this, to secure and to guard camps where ISIS fighters and their families have been detained now for many years. The big picture, the worry going forward, is that more clashes in this part of Syria could risk the resurgence of ISIS. This, again, for a new country, a new interim government, trying to find a way forward to heal the Syrian people. This is absolutely something that the new government does not want to see. And so talks again ongoing, but where this goes remains to be seen.
Sophia Yan, thank you as ever for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist. And you're back with The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Now, more than 2 months after Hurricane Helene ripped through Asheville in North Carolina, the city still has a long way to go before it recovers. It needs funds. But in the middle of all this, US lawmakers are once again trying to avoid a potential government shutdown. And tied up in all this are nearly $100 billion in disaster aid for the victims of Hurricane Helene. Well, our reporter H.J. Mai joins us from Asheville in North Carolina. A very good evening to you. A very good morning to you, I should say.
Yeah, good morning to you, Emma. Thanks for having me.
So you went to Asheville this week. What's it like?
Yeah, I mean, Asheville, obviously, it's a small mountain town. It's in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's very much known for its art scene. It has kind of like a hippie culture, and you still get that if you go there. But you also still see a lot of the remnants of the impact of Hurricane Helene. As you mentioned, the hurricane, hit the city and its surrounding areas a little bit over 2 months ago at the end of September. And there's still a lot of debris everywhere. You find just people in their driveways still, just throwing their garbage out or some of the broken leaves and broken branches and broken trees in their backyard. I mean, there's still a lot of cleanup going on. And I actually spoke with John Berry of Tetra Tech. It's a company that was hired by the local county and also by FEMA, by the Federal Emergency Management Administration, by the federal organization. And they were contracted to help with the cleanup. And he told me it probably will take years until, all the debris has really been removed.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has calculated their debris estimate at 10 million cubic yards, and that is a tremendous amount. It's not uncommon for these types of projects to be, 4, 6, 8, 10 years.
So that's one person who's, giving the long-term view. But can you describe the area, given the fact that, it has been very badly damaged by this, and the effect on a community, which is, it like you say, it's dominated by the Blue Ridge Mountains, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about a 2-hour drive from Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the biggest city in the state. And it's really, it's a tourism area. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, the landscape there is just beautiful. The Blue Ridge Mountains, which are part of the Appalachian Mountains here in the eastern United States. And, it has a lot to offer. It's the landscape, obviously, but, there are beautiful hiking trails. If you want to go mountain biking, you can do that. And a lot of those things have been destroyed. I mean, there are trails. I just went to a coffee shop in Asheville, and, people there were really mourning one of their favorite hiking trails because it's still, full of debris and nobody has cleared it. And they're trying to set up maybe, a volunteer group to actually clean up the hiking trail so they can do what they enjoy. And then also Asheville itself has marketed itself a little bit as this, counterculture little city in the mountains. It's very left-leaning. It's very artsy. There are galleries up and down main roads. It has award-winning, James Beard award-winning, restaurants, actually. So it has a lot to offer, and a lot of that has just been shut down for over 2 months. One of the biggest issue was that there was just no potable water for, I think it was 55 days. And that obviously hurt a lot of restaurants, hotels. And what is another thing that really hurt the economy in the area is the fact that fall, especially, when the foliage changes, is really the peak season for tourism in Asheville. And so I actually talked with Vic Isley. She's the CEO of tourism agency, Explore Asheville. And she describes a little bit of how that impacts the economy.
Research shows that 40% of small businesses never reopen their doors following an event like this. And that grit and gumption and determination of Western North Carolina is really aiming to buck that trend. Early estimates are 70% loss in the visitor economy for the fourth quarter alone. The River Arts District took 20 years to build and develop for creatives, and it took 20 hours to take 80% of that away.
HJ, just tell us a little bit more. Where does the community actually pull together on this?
what I've seen is really across the city, and also, small other communities in the surrounding areas who have just been as badly hit, is really that people rally around each other. I've talked to neighbors who, for example, there was this young couple who just moved into a home in the community right before Helene, and they knew that their neighbors are in their mid-80s. And, for the past basically 2.5 months, this young couple, has been grocery shopping, has done runs to the pharmacy to get medicine for this couple. You see small acts of kindness like that. But then also there's a lot of nonprofits working together with county agencies, federal agencies, to provide people with the bare minimum that they need. I myself was staying at a hotel where basically 80% of the rooms were actually booked by survivors. People who have lost their homes, lost their condominiums, who have now been living at a hotel room or in a hotel room for the past 2.5 months. I talked to a couple of them, and you can see that. And then local agencies and local, just members, church groups, for example, come in and provide breakfast for those people in the morning. It's not the hotel, it's the local community, and that's how you can really see it. And also when we talk about the business community that has been severely impacted, it's that by talking to the different folks that I've met, it's really that they want to support local businesses because they know how challenging this has been. And so you can really see, even on a Monday afternoon when I was there just a couple of days ago, galleries were full, breweries were full, companies who were not as impacted, they're hosting their Christmas parties at the local breweries, which Asheville has a dozen of them. And so you can really see that sticking together. And also, as we just went through an election season. Clearly, political affiliations, this has nothing to do with it. I've talked to two neighbors, one very much liberal and voted for Harris, and the other one very conservative, voted for Trump. And, once Hurricane Helene hit, those political affiliations just went out the window.
Well, finally, HJ, what we do need to ask you about, though, is this fact that the US lawmakers are trying to avoid a potential government shutdown. $100 billion in disaster aid for the likes of the victims of Helene is in the offing here. I mean, how much is there a fear that this money might never come?
I mean, there clearly is. I mean, I think when I talked yesterday to people, especially, in the business community there, they were actually pretty confident that, Congress would do this. They would, just pass this continuing resolution to keep the government open until mid-March. But then just yesterday, there has been this reporting, that Elon Musk, who obviously has the president-elect's ear, and Donald Trump himself apparently are talking to Republican lawmakers to not pass this. This has nothing really to do with the disaster funding. It's other items that are included in this continuing resolution that they have an issue with. And so now there's a fear. Once again, talking to Vic Isley, the CEO of the local tourism agency, and she says that money is badly needed to continue, helping the people who are most in need, but also just, to get back to some sense of normalcy. And yeah, there is certainly some fear, and especially now as we head into the holidays, that could be a challenge.
HJ Mai, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme, why Poland is paying particular attention to what Donald Trump will do.
Poland prevailed. Poland will always prevail.
That's all coming up later on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me on the line is Zoe Grunewald, who's the Westminster editor at The Lead. A very good morning to you, Zoe. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Delighted to have you on the programme. Let's start off with the imminent verdict in the trial of Dominique Pellicot and 50 other men accused of participating in this serial long-term drugging and raping of Gisèle Pellicot, who seems to have totally transformed the image of women in France.
Absolutely right. So today we are expecting an end to the trial, as you said, which will see the conviction of Dominique Pellicot, who, as you mentioned, admitted he has pled guilty to drugging his wife, Gisèle Pellicot, and inviting strangers into their bedroom to rape her. As you say, this case has really captured the attention, not just of women in France, but I would say across the world. You know, there are discussions about Gisèle Pellicot being a feminist hero. She waived her anonymity so that the trial could be open to the press and public, and that all the men who were on trial would be named and identified, including her husband. And her insistence, this line she said that shame must change sides, has now become a global feminist slogan. So today, I think a lot of eyes will be on what conviction is dealt out to her husband, and a lot of eyes paid to, I'm sure, any statement she makes, because she has really changed the way we look at rape and sexual assault across the world.
It's an astonishing story that she has actually taken control of, given the fact that she says that she will probably never get over what happened to her. And the statements that we hear from her legal team are one of a woman who took an awful lot of courage to waive her anonymity and to take her sunglasses off. And I think she's actually gone and changed her name and is starting a new life somewhere else. But what has happened is that I think Reuters has covered this in the last couple of days. It has prompted a large number of women to come forward and say, hang on a minute, this has happened to me and I've only just realised. And I think Gisèle Pellicot's daughter has started a charity, a campaign group called Don't Put Me to Sleep. It suddenly emerged as a phenomenon within France.
Absolutely. It's a really extraordinary story that has absolutely opened, the door to so many more stories of violence against women and girls. This website he was using to recruit men, which was basically called Without Their Knowledge. This was a website that was frequented by lots of people. The lawyer who represents Gisèle Pellicot said the men were a kaleidoscope of French society. There were nurses in there, civil servants, all sorts of men from all sorts of walks of life. So I think it's really opened up a conversation about violence against women and girls and how actually it is far more commonplace and violent and deep-rooted than many of us would like to admit.
Let's move on to another story that we're going to hear about. The US Supreme Court is hearing the challenge by TikTok, the social media site, to try to stop it from being banned in the US.
Yes, so the US Supreme Court is going to hear legal arguments from TikTok as to why it should not be banned or sold. It has already said it will not act on a request for an emergency injunction against the law, but we know that the US government is taking action against the app because of its links to this Chinese company called ByteDance. And obviously TikTok is questioning this. They want to see this thrown out. There is a big question because obviously if the US leads the way in banning TikTok due to its links with China, you will look over here to the UK about what we will do, other countries across the West. As lots and lots of people use TikTok, but there is that question of foreign interference. There is also a question about what Donald Trump will do. Donald Trump has already said he's not supportive of TikTok being banned in the US, so it could be thrown out anyway. But it is a very interesting kind of landmark case where you see the state going up against a very powerful, influential social media company.
It does actually sort of open the big question about, is the law robust enough to deal with organisations such as TikTok? Indeed, there is so much in our world of technology, from everything from AI to TikTok, which seems to have sort of appeared and absolutely overtaken the way that the sort of the structures of society.
Absolutely. And, there is obviously we know that TikTok works on algorithms, but there is so much question about how those algorithms are manufactured, how they're created, who they, what sort of information they promote. There's lots of concerns here in the UK about the spread of misinformation on social media sites like TikTok. But it is now a site that lots of people, especially young people, are very reliant on. It's where they get their news. So to have a ruling in this case against TikTok would have extraordinary repercussions. But it really would change, I think, how we look at this company, and indeed, as you say, whether we need to strengthen legislation across the world against these social media companies.
And indeed, what Donald Trump had lunch with the boss of TikTok a couple of days ago in that attempt and had said that he had warm feelings towards TikTok. So just let's cast ourselves a little ahead. I think the ban on TikTok is due to happen the day before the inauguration of Donald Trump. So there is this rather interesting sort of intersection of time and events. The Trump's sort of tendency to like TikTok isn't necessarily a sort of a straightforward one, is it? It's because he doesn't like Meta.
Yes, that's right. But also, he says, it's really interesting. He said at a press conference on Monday that he has a warm spot in his heart for TikTok because he won the youth by 34 points. I mean, this is despite the fact that the majority of 18 to 29-year-olds backed Kamala Harris. But he feels that TikTok it is in some way helpful to him and to his message. And we see that, we see that here in the UK. There are some parties who are capitalising on TikTok and how it speaks to younger people. And I think he sees, he cozies up to big tech, but as you say, he's not a big fan of Meta, that actually there is a path here for him that involves working quite closely with these social media companies.
Let's move on to a story which effectively is the next chapter in the Labour government's sort of deep alienation of large swathes of the population here in the UK. So Labour came into power in July. Since then, it's infuriated, enraged pensioners who've had a winter fuel boost, a financial boost taken away from them. He's made the farmers very cross because he's given them an inheritance tax problem. And now he seems to have made women between the ages of 60 and 67 absolutely seething.
Yes, that's right. So this is on the back of, in March, there was recommendations from the Parliamentary Ombudsman that women who were born in the 1950s, who saw the state pension age rise from 60 to 65, were out of pocket as a result of poor messaging and communication of the changes by the Department for Work and Pensions. It recommended women should get up to about £3,000 each as remunerations. But this is a potential total cost of about £10.5 billion to the public purse. And as a result, the Labour government have said they are not going to do that. Now, there are plenty of questions about, whether or not these women were properly informed. I think the Ombudsman said that there was trouble with the communication. But what Keir Starmer has said is that 90% of women had some general awareness about the potential changes in the future. This, as you say, has enraged campaigners who say he's cherry picking statistics from a while ago. Actually, it was more like 60%. And that, these women who have been affected say they've been out of pocket, some, ranging into the hundreds of thousands as a result of the changes that they weren't made aware of. The problem is, as we know, that money, as Labour keeps saying, is very, very tight in this country. We had a budget that was quite punitive to all those groups. It is very unlikely they are going to commit to £10.5 billion in compensation. But as you say, these are difficult decisions. And the WASPy women have been campaigning for years and years and years. They have some support in the Labour Party. So this is also an issue that's likely to divide the governing party as well.
Tell us a little bit more about how the WASPy women are being seen at Westminster. WASPy is WASPI, Women Against State Pension Inequality. They're sort of wearing lots of purple and green, which is a sort of an emancipation colours. But at the same time, there is a sort of sense, I'm not entirely sure how to say this politely, but discussions are being made as to whether they have actually done a sort of made their case in the most sympathetic and attractive way. The appearance is of a lot of very, very angry women. And that is not necessarily the most sort of positive and solutions-based, dare I say it, approach.
I think that's true. There has been, I would say support for this is quite mixed. Some people do feel, and as I said, people in the party as well, feel that compensation is deserved for these women. Some of the stories you hear about, how not being aware of the age has affected, the age change has affected their lives. But others feel, the whole of the country is facing now, cost of living squeezes. They faced wage stagnation. You talk especially about how this has fallen on young people, who can't access housing, who haven't seen their wages go up, who are suffering from generational inequalities within the economy. There is a real sense of, well, why should there be a massive handout to an older group of pensioners who by and large are better off than other groups in society? And so actually, as you say, although there are some people who feel a lot for these women and feel a lot for, how it can affect you to have uncertainty about your financial future, There is a whole group of younger people who say, I don't even know when I'm going to retire or if I'm going to get my pension, because there are these inequalities. So I think, as much as I do think this is an issue that's going to rumble on, and you're going to hear campaigners and you're going to see the other side of the political spectrum try and take advantage of this, I do think there is a sense that Labour is right to hold firm on this, because if they did commit to 10.5 billion as a handout, that would very much undermine their message of we're all in this together and we have to commit to fiscal discipline.
Finally, let's go to a story that's not just appeared on the BBC website, but has been widespread on the BBC's news bulletins as well, which is this quite extraordinary sort of account of life in the Arctic as polar bears are unable to start fishing because the patch of water, the patch of sea that they normally do use, isn't freezing over. And as a result, they are starving and they are looking for alternative sources of food, which can in some cases be human beings.
Yeah, that's right. So this story really captured my attention because I think we hear a lot about the impact of global warming and climate change in terms of natural disasters, in terms of food security, in terms of energy security, but often we don't hear about the encroachment of the natural world, particularly animals, onto living spaces as their environment gets degraded. And this is a really acute problem in the Arctic where, as you say, ice is melting faster. There is less ice across the year. So hungry polar bears are moving towards towns. This particular town that's been covered is a place called Churchill in Canada. And it's, frightening the locals because they now have to live with the fear of running into a polar bear. If you know anything about polar bears, you'll know if you come face to face with them, you're very unlikely to survive, especially when, as you say, they're hungry and they don't have their usual food sources. So it's a very interesting piece about how Churchill is trying to adapt, how they're doing lots of research around polar bears, how they're trying to look at what they can do as a town to keep polar bears happy and healthy while keeping themselves safe. But it is a really interesting account. It's not something we have to worry about in the UK. We don't have to worry about coming across wildlife particularly. But for some of these places across the globe, this is a really acute issue. And it's really interesting to see how this is going to become, this in varying forms will become more of a problem across the world in areas that are particularly vulnerable to acute changes in the climate.
Zoe Grunewald, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:32 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Let's have a look at what else we're keeping an eye on today. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will announce additional funding for humanitarian assistance to Sudan, plus efforts to support civil society in the country. Secretary of State Blinken will make the announcement when he chairs a UN Security Council meeting on Sudan later today. The German government has doubled the amount of arms exports to Ukraine this year and halved them to Israel. Data from the country's economy ministry showed that Ukraine received equipment worth 8.1 billion euros, up from 4.4 billion euros last year. And Boeing has resumed production of all of its aircraft. A strike by machinists had halted production of its 737, 767 and 777 models across the Pacific Northwest. Boeing delivered just 13 commercial jets in November, less than a quarter of the 56 jetliners it handed over to customers at the same time last year. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 7:33 here in London, 8:33 in Warsaw. Now, the election of Donald Trump to the White House thrilled Poland's right-wing populist opposition politicians. Having lost power last year, the Law and Justice Party believed that having a figure such as Donald Trump in the White House would put the wind beneath their wings. What they didn't bank on was a possibility of Trump trying to play a part in ending the Russian war against Ukraine, which poses some new difficulties for them. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Alex Szczerbiak, who's Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex and the author of the Polish Politics blog. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
So there's no doubt, though, that before we start talking about the complications, that the right can see an ally in Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, when Donald Trump was last in office, the current opposition party, the right-wing Law and Justice Party, was in office itself, and they had extremely close relations. They saw themselves as ideological allies, both battling against globalist liberal elites. And when Donald Trump was elected, when he was re-elected, there was great rejoicing on the part of the Law and Justice Party. There were some people were even wearing MAGA hats in Parliament on the day after. So yeah, they see themselves as very close ideological allies, and Law and Justice sees Donald Trump's re-election as a significant boost in its comeback in terms of returning to office.
And the boost that it offers is not just a sort of a return to populism, but also a push against the more left-wing or centrist or liberal governments that you find that are now occupying lots of spots in European politics, at least.
Exactly, that's right. And it also gives them an opportunity to argue that they are not isolated on the international world stage. I mean, one of the arguments that the current governing parties, led by Donald Tusk, have used against Law and Justice was that because of its bad relations with the EU political establishment, the previous Law and Justice government marginalised Poland within Europe and internationally. But now Law and Justice can actually turn that on its head because of its excellent relations with Donald Trump. It means that it argues that Law and Justice is actually in a better position to develop relations with what is, after all, Poland's most important military security ally, whereas the relations between the current governing parties and Donald Trump are rather problematic.
This, however, could backfire, couldn't it? Because Donald Trump has talked in a great deal about his ability to bring about an end to the Ukraine war, that there is a sense now that Ukraine is going to struggle to reclaim all the land that Russia has taken by itself. So there is talk in lots of places now about a negotiated end to the conflict. And if that negotiated end to the conflict is weighted in Russia's favour, that poses a problem for Poland.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that this could backfire on Law and Justice if the peace settlement is one that's felt to be favourable to Russia on Russia's terms, and potentially leaves them in a position where they can regroup and would embolden Vladimir Putin to further threaten Ukraine and indeed Poland, which is its eastern neighbour. I think what Law and Justice is reassuring itself about is the fact that when he was in office, in spite of a lot of his rhetoric about admiration for certain aspects of the way that Vladimir Putin conducted himself as a international leader, he actually did support Poland in attempting to stand up to Russia. He helped to greatly strengthen the Polish military presence in the US military presence in Poland. He took measures to support Polish energy security and also to strengthen regional cooperation. So in practice, Donald Trump was actually very much in line with Poland's strategic interests. And that's obviously what Law and Justice will be hoping, and indeed the current government, because the current government, although politically it's problematic for Law and Justice, doesn't want a settlement to the Ukraine war that's on favourable terms to Russia, and one that might potentially undermine Polish security.
And there's also the more sort of the wider supranational issues here that you have. If there is a deal, there has been a suggestion that Ukraine could see EU NATO troops actually on Ukrainian territory, getting involved in maintaining any kind of peace. And Poland has been mentioned as one of those countries which could supply forces to that.
Yes, this is very interesting and in some ways actually raises some of the dilemmas that there are in Poland about support for the Ukraine. Because on the one hand, Poland is absolutely 100% behind Ukraine in the conflict against Russia. It's been a vital hub for providing military and humanitarian aid. It's been an absolutely critical player in supporting Ukraine in the war. On the other hand, I think that there are lots of concerns within Poland that if the conflict continues, there's always a danger that it could accelerate, that it could spill over. And given that Poland is a neighbouring state to Ukraine, that would be the obvious country that would be threatened if there would be any escalation or spillover. And in that sense, that's why I think in spite of its strong support for Ukraine and continued strong support for Ukraine, diplomatically and indeed militarily, there is a great reluctance to have Polish soldiers actually stationed within Ukraine. And even the current government has made this clear that, that they don't want this to happen, because obviously if there were to be any altercations, Polish soldiers would be involved. And it's very different if, your troops are involved in an international altercation where they're involved in a peacekeeping mission, if you happen to be the neighbouring country, than if it's happening a long way away from you. And I think that's the concern. So you've got this kind of dual feeling in Poland. On the one hand, they absolutely want Ukraine to win this war and for any peace settlement to come out on favourable terms for it, and are prepared to do a lot to support them. On the other hand, there are a lot of concerns about if it does continue, that it could escalate to, and Poland could somehow be drawn in, which obviously most Poles really do not want.
Alex Szczerbiak, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're The Globalist. It's 9:40 a.m. if you're having a late breakfast in Athens, 7:40 here in London. Now, last week saw the launch of Greece, the Monocle handbook, with a lavish party in Athens. In attendance was the book's editor, Chiara Rimella, who brought the first copy back with her to London. She sat down with Monocle's Tom Webb to talk about the event and what to expect when the handbook is available to buy in 2025.
I loved the event because it really was the crowning kind of glory of months and months of work to have gone into this book, but also because something really magical happens when you dedicate a book to the most interesting people in a country. They all suddenly show up and come to a room, and you have basically the best party in history because the best designers, the best entrepreneurs, the best hoteliers, all of the best creatives in the country are suddenly basically all sat in a room together. One of the things that I really they were standing and clinking glasses of champagne. But one of the things I loved the most about it, and I think this is very true of lots of countries around the Mediterranean, or at least I've certainly observed it in Italy, in some of the cities in Italy as well, is that there's a really tight-knit community. So basically in Athens, if you're doing something nice and creative, you're kind of going to know everyone who's in your remit. So people kept walking through the door, be like, oh, you're here. It was just this really jovial atmosphere. And the party was held inside Athene, which is just kind of hallowed and recently reinvigorated restaurant. So it was a very kind of glamorous atmosphere just off Syntagma Square. So right in the heart of Athens, but in this kind of very historical type of spot. And the Ministry of Tourism, I think, has been very keen to emphasize that the narrative of Greece is one that goes beyond the sort of the obvious, the sun and the beach and the summer. And of course, we all know the country for that and love it for that matter. But I think doing this book has really taught me so much about the country that I did not expect. And certainly as an Italian, as you will know, we obviously have our own kind of competition when it comes to, who's the best when it comes to summer holidays. But what I have realized is that there's just like so much more to the country, and kudos to the correspondents, the journalists on the ground that really travelled to the lesser explored regions of Greece and brought us back some incredible nuggets that make this book, I think, into as close a representation of the country and its best bits as we possibly could. It's an impossible task, always, but we really tried.
And this book goes far further than any other book on Greece, any other travel guide. It is a handbook to relocating to the country if you wanted. There's everything there. How did you go about finding these incredible voices, this amazing talent that were brought together at the party?
I think that the proposition of relocating to Greece has obviously been very enticing. It's perhaps, I think, one of the countries in Europe that I've certainly heard most about when it comes to people who are umming and ahhing about relocating somewhere else. Athens actually does come up pretty often in terms of a potential relocation kind of location. And it's interesting actually also the relocation that happens within the country itself. Lots and lots of people who used to live in Athens then decide to pack it all in and go to the islands year round. And so we're seeing this amazing movement towards creating communities on the islands that can last the the year long. And I'm thinking particularly about islands like Syros, for example, but also Crete. You know, Crete is a huge island. So like the cities are real cities and not just like tiny little villages on the top of a mountain. So we tapped into a network of people who have done it and have kind of lived there for a long time. And also the ones that have just kind of come in and are enamored by this new locale. I think what makes the Monocle books different is, as you say, this section at the back of the book, which is called kind of Put Down Roots, where we encourage you to look at the architecture studios. I'm thinking of people like Point Supreme or K Studio who, you know, have been in the pages of Monocle time and time again as kind of spotlighting their work. But actually, like we're saying to you, you know, if you do fancy a new residence, why don't you give these guys a call? And if you do want to buy some furniture, why not head up on Entropy and see if they can kit out your kitchen with some proper marble or things like that. And I think that, again, one of the most surprising things was that there's such a variety of people who have actually relocated to Greece. All of them are kind of following this, like a very kind of dreamlike scenario, you know, in the examples that we put to you in terms of people who have done it. We have someone who has become a winemaker, somebody who is an art gallerist, someone who is a novelist. And there's so much energy, I think, in the country at the moment, because we all know of the narrative of the financial crash and the difficulties that have happened in the past. But the narrative of the Greeks coming back to the country from around Europe to rebuild something, a real sort of like a make-do attitude that genuinely comes through from whenever you speak to so many of the entrepreneurs that are in these pages. And a lot of the time, I think a genuine desire to reconnect with abandoned and unloved places from their childhoods. You know, there are so many stories in the book where a hotelier would remember seeing an abandoned structure by where they used to go for their childhood vacation and then deciding to do something about it and actually take matters in their own hands. There's so many people who had their kind of dreamlike, idyllic childhoods in Greece and then went and lived a very kind of corporate lifestyles somewhere else around the world and then just deciding enough is enough. I need to go back to the sun.
Something that resonates with quite a lot of people in the grey climates of the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. Chiara Rumella in conversation with Tom Webb there. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk aviation. Murdo Morrison joins me on the line now. Very good morning to you, Murdo. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
Glad to hear it. Right, Head of Strategic Content at Flight Global and keeping an eye on the world of aviation. Let's begin with Airbus and the A321XLR, which is the sort of the newest, flashiest member of the A320neo family.
It is, yes. And this was launched as you say, the latest variant of the A320neo family in 2019 and has done really well for Airbus. It's they've got, I think, 550 plus orders from about 25 airlines. And the great thing about this variant is that it's got extra fuel tanks that allows it to fly transatlantic, so around sort of 4,700 nautical miles, which is comfortably, East Coast to Europe. And a lot of airlines have sort of taken that opportunity to launch services. Now, it takes about 180 passengers. So what this allows airlines is to operate on thinner routes. So you don't have to operate a wide body aircraft, a sort of 300-seat aircraft. You can do it much more efficiently, carrying 150, 180 passengers on these long range routes. The latest development is that the Federal Aviation Administration has now certificated the variant, which opens the door for airlines such as American, United, JetBlue to bring this aircraft into service probably in 2025, 2026.
So the interesting thing is, I think Iberia last month launched its first transatlantic flight using the A320 on XLR. This is obviously Airbus pushing ahead and dominating a market which, dare I say it, used to be occupied by the Boeing 757. Still, Boeing absolutely struggling here.
Boeing absolutely struggling. A few years ago, before Boeing's crises that started 2018, 2019, they were looking to launch something called the NMA, the sort of this new medium-sized aircraft that would sort of replace the 757, which of course hasn't now been built for about 20 years. And there's been really a gap in the market for that sort of longer range narrow body, really for 2 decades. And Airbus have come in and filled that. And there's really no immediate prospect of Boeing being able to respond.
Let's talk about US aviation and questions being asked about what Donald Trump what the effect of a Trump presidency will have, not just on airlines, but on the narrative of aviation pushing towards net zero.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, of course, there's lots of things that we still don't know about what a Donald Trump second presidency will mean. But one of the questions being asked is, the sort of the climate change skepticism around Donald Trump and some of his sort of inner circle, the dig baby dig, all this stuff about returning to oil and carbon power. What effect this will have on the pretty impressive progress that US airlines have made towards net zero. They have been pace setters in this. And a lot of it has been to do with incentives, with government tax incentives and so on under Biden. If these are reversed under Trump, what effect will that have? Will US airlines continue their progress towards net zero? If they don't, and European airlines, by contrast, who've got sort of quite strict mandates on, for example, how much sustainable aviation fuel they should be using over the next few years, will that sort of create this uncompetitive situation where European airlines feel constrained and, that it's anti-competitive against US airlines that don't have these same strictures to operate to? So we don't know what's going to happen. And of course, Trump famously can say things and then doesn't necessarily carry them through. But there is certainly some concern, I think, among those who do believe in man-made climate change that we could see some worrying reversals.
Murdo Morrison from Flight Global, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, while what it stands for may be beautiful, it is not easy to make a passport a unique thing of beauty. There are proportions, standards and styles which must allow the item to fulfil its very important role. However, in Portugal, a search has been launched to design the next national passport. And the producer of this programme and senior foreign correspondent and woman who has her Portuguese passport upstairs in her drawer is Carlota Rebellin. She joins me now. Very good morning, Carlota.
Good morning, Emma.
So this is the fun thing about radio. What does a current passport look like, and what do people say is wrong with it?
So there's nothing wrong with the current passport. To start up, the Portuguese government likes to change the design quite frequently. We're talking about more or less every 10 years, a bit longer. because of security features to prevent the likelihood of the passport being falsified, etc. So it has to do with security measures, and it sees that as an opportunity to redesign how the passport looks like. The current passport has these quite simple square lines at the front. It is the burgundy colour that the majority of EU passports have, and then inside each page has significant, I'm going to say landmarks, but that doesn't mean necessarily just buildings. So significant landmarks of Portugal, the entire mainland territory and the islands as well. So it can be some monuments, but also there is, I know for the Azores, the archipelago, there's a nod to the nature there. There's to some birds as well. So all things Portuguese. So it's a quite lovely homage to the country.
It's one of those delightful things that actually passes the time in a passport queue, is you have to try and guess what the monument is in your respected national passport. So you've described a passport which sounds in pretty good working order. So why have they decided to change it? You said just because of the update to security, but also it's a design thing as well, isn't it?
It is a design thing. And what's interesting about this time around, in previous editions, because the updates to the design happen frequently and happen every 10 years or so, sometimes it's been someone is just tasked with that. But this time around, the government has decided to open a design competition. And they call it, the theme is national territory. So through creative design, imagery, that is kind of like the guidelines for this competition. Designers are invited to not only look at redesigning the visa pages and the biographical page that has all our info, but also the cover. So under this theme of national territory. And what big change that's also happening on the technical side is that from now on, Portuguese passports will stop having a 5-year validity and start having a 10-year validity. Hence why this competition is also a chance to implement a lot of these additional security checks.
And it's a very good opportunity for the design community to have not just a passport that's going to last until 2030, but 2035. So
it's part of the whole government trying to simplify bureaucracy, which, as you might imagine, in a country like Portugal, it is quite a thing.
A welcome gesture. How have the design community received this? Have they just sort of gone bananas straight away and have started design themselves into a frenzy?
So it is there's an interesting debate that has ensued ever since this announcement. So it's important to say that the cash prize for the winning design is €5,000. And I feel that has been the issue that a lot of people in the design community have had an issue with. Not necessarily because of just thinking that work should be rewarded and valued more, but because it feeds into a discussion that's been ongoing in Portugal about design as a profession not being valued as such. So, for example, architecture has its professional body, its sort of bar/union. There's not such thing for designers. So there's been a campaign over the past couple of years to recognise design as a certified profession. So for many, the fact that the government has put €5,000 as the cash prize shows that they do not understand this quest for recognition within the profession.
And there's a sense, therefore, that the government isn't it doesn't necessarily recognise design in a way that arguably it should.
Yes, and this government in particular started on the really wrong note with designers because the previous government had commissioned a new national identity for Portugal. It was the designer Eduardo Aires, who we've interviewed here at Monocle in the past, who came up with it and included a new font. Everything was thought out. It was a brand identity. And somehow it became a political weapon throughout the campaign. And one of the very first things the new government did, after announcing the new ministers, the new prime minister decided to scale back the design. And at the time, people there's no design reason for it. It's just because it was commissioned by the opposing government. So let's just say designers are having a bit of a harsh time with the new government. Hopefully, this passport competition is a chance to redo some of those wrongs.
It'll give you something interesting to look at in the queue. Carlotta Rebello, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and also to our producers, Carlotta Rebello, Tom Webb and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was was Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. I hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.